Hi, everybody, and welcome to the James Beard Foundation Back to Business Conflict Resolution and Mediation webinar. My name is Ashley Kosiak, and I'm an Impact Program Manager here at the James Beard Foundation, and I'm going to be moderating this panel here today. Apologize if you're hearing a few sirens right now. We are in New York City working from home, or at least I am New York City. Other folks are from, I think across the country, but we'll deal with those great siren noises. So how this webinar works, the webinar is being recorded and will be available to you and to anyone who wants to watch it in about 24 hours. It takes about 24 hours for that to buffer and for us to get it up on our website. So you'll be able to find it at jamesbeard.org, and I think it'll also be on openforgood.com. We'll save any questions for the end of the program as time allows. So you're welcome to write in your question at any time during the webinar. To do that, you'll see a little icon that looks like a question mark and a little message bubble on the right side of your screen. And so you can enter your question there at any time, and myself and my colleague Debbie, who is also helping to kind of facilitate this webinar, will see it and we'll address those questions at the end of the program as time allows. If you're having any technical difficulties, message us and we'll do our best to help troubleshoot them. Oftentimes, the best solution is to log off and then log back on, but give us a shot and we'll do what we can. So again, this is the Back to Business Conflict Resolution and Mediation webinar, and this is a series brought to you by Audi. So I will first introduce the panelists, and then I'm going to hand it over to Sarah Diehl, who's going to kind of take us through a presentation. So first we have Sarah Diehl. She is the founder founder and principal of Empower Hospitality. We're also joined by Amy Zhou, and she is the GM and partner at Cote Korean Steakhouse and co-founder of Wine Empowered. And we're also joined by Charles Syke. Charles is hospitality and operations executive and also former F&B partner of Ferris Restaurant, Good Behavior Rooftop Bar, and Paper Coffee Shop. So first, Sarah, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks so much, Ashley, and thank you to you and the James Beard Foundation for hosting us today. So I'm going to actually start by walking everyone through a brief presentation about conflict resolution and mediation. I'll pause for a moment while it comes up on the screen here. Perfect. Okay, great. So first, just a brief introduction to Empowered Hospitality. So we are an HR consulting firm specializing in the hospitality industry. We offer comprehensive, affordable, and flexible HR coverage, again, specialized in restaurants, hotels, bars, and anything hospitality related. We offer project-based support like compliance training and handbook writing, as well as the option to outsource all or part of your HR function. We've supported over 70 restaurant groups and over 10,000 employees in the past 3.5 years. And a little bit about my background. So I specialize in HR now, but I actually started my career in restaurant operations, working for Hillstone Restaurant Group for a little over 4 years. Then I got into training in HR in 2014 with a New York City-based restaurant group and founded Empowered Hospitality in 2017. So as we dive in, I just wanted to start by briefly touching base on the larger context of resolving conflict. So what's our purpose? When resolving conflict, the goal is not victory or defeat. It's reaching an understanding and letting go of our need to be right. And I think this is a really helpful quote for me when I think about the purpose of conflict resolution. So we're going to walk through 10 very simple, actionable steps that can help you and your team resolve conflict. Restaurant managers and employees are on the front lines, especially now when it comes to enforcing COVID-19 safety protocols. I'm reading stories in the news every day about mask-related confrontations, and we want to give you some really simple tools to navigate these situations. So step 1 is define acceptable behavior. Step 2 is prepare and train. Step 3, set expectations early and often. 4, start on a high note. 5, listen and empathize. 6, offer a because or an explanation. 7, diffuse the situation. 8, protect yourself. 9, take time to recharge. And 10, reflect and learn. So we're going to actually walk through those in a little more detail together today. So the first step is to define acceptable behavior. And all of you probably have an employee code of conduct that you use to guide appropriate behavior in the workplace. We think creating a guest code of conduct can help your team better delineate between acceptable and unacceptable behavior. Some things to think about when you're creating your guest code of conduct: consider addressing violence, drug and alcohol use, safety, particularly COVID health and safety, and mutual respect and non-discrimination. And think also about how those guest expectations measure up to your expectations of your team. So ask yourself, should we hold guests to any different standards of behavior than our own team? And what is the impact of not holding guests accountable? And this is a conversation that you can engage your fellow managers in, all of your employees. A collective effort will be a great way to engage people in the end result here. So next up is prepare a plan and train your team. So some questions to think about when you're starting to prepare a plan. Why have you established this rule? We're going to talk a little bit later about having a because or an explanation prepared to offer your guests. First and foremost, you need to know why you've established the rule. Is it government mandated? Is it a decision that ownership has made based on what they think is important? When should a frontline employee escalate a conflict to management? So how far do you want a server or bartender to take the confrontation before passing it off? And then which manager or managers are equipped to field those complaints? A brand new manager might be less equipped than someone who's had more experience with these types of issues. Who should the manager escalate to if necessary? We used to keep corporate's business cards at the host stand. Maybe you have ownership's business cards. Who can you provide to the guest as a point of contact if you're unable to resolve their complaint? What flexibility can you offer the guest? What possible solutions are there? What behavior and beliefs are unacceptable? Again, keep in mind that last decision-making process regarding your guest code of ethics and what you and your team feel is okay and not okay. And then when should you call the police? And, although we hope this never happens, we highly encourage your whole team to know that the police are a resource for them if they feel that an altercation is getting out of hand. So I wanted to actually walk you through an effective role-playing exercise that we use. And we find role-playing to be one of the best ways to really embed an understanding of something like conflict resolution within your team. So to start this role-playing exercise, you'll have everyone contribute an idea of a sticky situation. It could be a guest is angry for wearing a mask. It could be a guest is 30 minutes past their reservation, whatever the reason may be. And you're going to put those in a bowl and split the team into groups of 3 people. Those 3 people can decide which role they want to play. One of them will be the guest, one of them will be the employee, and one of them will be the coach. And the coach's job is to monitor the conversation, monitor the role play, and provide feedback throughout as far as how they could handle things differently. As you go through the groups, have them choose an example from the common bowl and act out the exercise, act out the sticky situation, and let the coach provide them with feedback. When they reach the end of the exercise, make sure that you regroup and discuss what could have been better in their engagement. And keep repeating this exercise until you're sure that everyone completely understands and is confident dealing with these situations. So 3, set expectations early and often. Each touch point that a guest encounters before they enter your restaurant is an opportunity to communicate your expectations to them. A couple of key steps where this can happen: online reservations, confirmation call or text, your restaurant's website, or outdoor signage. And I'm sure there are other touch points as well where you have an opportunity to communicate your expectations and also your health and safety standards. 4, start on a high note. So when going into one of these potentially contentious conversations, try to keep in mind that how you approach it will impact the reaction of the person that you're speaking to. So I would always start on a high note. Don't jump to conclusions. Assume that this person is confused or frustrated, but you're going to be able to diffuse the situation. Offer a friendly greeting, just like you would to any other guest. Even maybe start with a compliment, and then ask, how can I help you? So the key is going to be honestly and openly listening to their issue, even if they've already expressed it to another team member, so they know that you have a personal investment in understanding what they're struggling with. So, like I said, listen and empathize. Even a relaxed mind is nearly impossible to change. And this is important to know, as many people have very deeply seated feelings about mask wearing, about the state of the world currently. When people are asked, however, to think of something positive about themselves, they're more open to facts. So we can use the questioning technique, which is basically sincerely asking the guest to explain their problem in detail without casting judgment, and asking follow-up questions to clarify as needed. Actively listening makes the guest feel that they're being taken seriously, and the act of talking and explaining redirects the guest's mind to a more rational state. Finally, find what you can agree with. Yeah, wearing a mask is incredibly uncomfortable. Yeah, I wish that this weren't a requirement. There are things that you can probably genuinely agree with that will let the guests know that you're on their side. Finally, we get asked often if apologizing is good or bad. Apologizing when taking ownership of something that isn't your fault is not recommended, but you can apologize for the situation and how the guest feels without accepting blame, and that is important. Next is offer a because. So in the 1970s, a Harvard psychologist conducted an experiment at a public library testing the willingness of people to allow someone to cut in line at the photocopy machine. In this test, they asked 3 different questions of the people waiting in line. Question 1 was, excuse me, I have 5 pages. Could I use the Xerox machine? 60% of people agreed to let them go first. The second was, excuse me, I have 5 pages. Could I use the Xerox machine because I'm in a rush? The third was, excuse me, I have 5 pages. Could I use the Xerox machine because I have to make some copies? What's really interesting is question 2 and 3 both achieved more than 90% agreement, regardless of the legitimacy of the reason that they gave. So what's important here is, when you share bad news with a guest, offering an explanation will help mitigate the flow of toxic emotions to the brain. A solid because will also make it hard for them to turn back into anger mode. So this could be something like, we require that masks are worn because it's a requirement that New York State has currently. Or we require that masks are worn in order to protect our employees. And all coming to agreement on what that because is will help your team navigate those situations even better. There are some other things that you can try to diffuse the situation. Number 1 is just stay calm, even if the guest's anger escalates. Find something that you can agree with. Like I mentioned earlier, I completely agree, these masks are so uncomfortable. Step to the side away from the host stand and other guests. The upset guest will follow you. This gets others out of the line of fire and may reduce the guest's embarrassment, which can increase their anger. Identify an ally. We all know that one person in the group who's embarrassed that their friend is making a scene. By appealing to them, sometimes you can have their help in calming down the upset guest. Take 5. If a conflict is escalating, politely ask the guest, please excuse me for a moment, and take some time to regroup. Call in reinforcements. So rely on your team if you need backup. That might mean more senior manager. That might just mean another manager on duty. That might mean stepping away for a moment and having the host politely chat with them. And then finally, present options. So is there an area of the restaurant where the guest can stand without a mask? Is there another way that you can serve them? Having alternatives ready to go can also be very helpful. Protect yourself. So it's important to let your fellow managers and employees know when you're going into a potentially contentious conversation for your own safety. Tell them what to do if it escalates, including calling the police if it gets out of control. Use your definition of unacceptable behavior, which we talked about earlier, to know when to exit the conversation. And like I said, call the police if you feel a guest is getting out of hand, and especially if they threaten you physically. We are all exceptionally tough in restaurants, but that does not mean that we have to submit ourselves to verbal abuse or physical danger. Finally, take time to recharge. Dealing with conflict saps your energy and resilience. Rather than jump back on the floor, take a few minutes to decompress. And then reflect and learn. Once the dust has settled, reflect and think about what you could have done better or what you could do differently next time. So that's it for our presentation. We're going to transition into a question and answer session with the rest of the panel, but we are happy to answer any of your questions, and you're welcome to contact us at Empowered Hospitality at the information shown on your screen here.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And Charles and Amy, if you want to turn your cameras and microphones back on, we'll get our panel conversation started. But just like Sarah said, now is the time to submit those questions via the question icon. And we're going to have a moderated conversation here, and we're going to try to get to as many questions as we can at the end of the program. So I'm going to try to direct these questions, I'll direct them to each of you as it makes sense. But if you hear something that makes you respond or think of something else, definitely, chime in, please do. So, I'm going to start, Amy and Charles. Amy, I'm going to start with you and then, kind of direct the question to Charles. What are some challenges you've faced when dealing with uncooperative diners, both pre-COVID, because we know that there were uncooperative diners before COVID happened. This isn't totally new, though it's definitely a sort of heightened situation right now. So pre-COVID and also now during COVID. And like I said, Amy, I'll start with you, and then Charles, if you'd like to respond as well.
Sure. Thank you, Ashley. So, in terms of uncooperative guests, I actually had a really great guest ask me a question a few days ago. A regular came into the restaurant and he posed this question that really kind of got me thinking. He had asked me, hey, now that we're in the middle of a global pandemic, do you feel that guests have become a little bit more sympathetic? And I kind of thought about it and I said, I think that the guests that were always great guests have through this crisis become even better guests. And, unfortunately, I do think a lot of guests that were uncooperative to begin with have become a little bit more uncooperative. But that being said, these challenges that we're now facing in a post-COVID world as it relates to mask wearing and all these new policies and procedures, they're not that unlike the challenges that we faced with difficult guests before. And, one thing that I really appreciate, Sarah, out of your presentation is really that setting expectations aspect. And I think a lot of conflicts can be avoided before the guest even reaches the restaurant by setting that sort of expectation. So for example, on Coat's website, throughout our entire booking process, we actually uploaded a new FAQ section that addressed a lot of folks' concerns about COVID-19 and how the restaurant would be handling those safety procedures moving forward. as well as throughout our booking process, we have it displayed before, during, and after guests make reservations. It's pretty well stated that there is an expectation that guests will arrive to the restaurant in masks, and in fact that the only place that they are not that they are allowed to be unmasked would actually be at the table while they are seated for dinner. And I think just setting those expectations has helped us tremendously.
Excellent, thank you. And Charles, what are some of the challenges that you and your staff have faced when dealing with uncooperative diners?
I think that a lot of people come out to dinner for different reasons, so understanding what their expectations are when they enter the restaurant is important. I think a really common thing that happens in busy, buzzy restaurants is people arrive to a reservation at a certain time, and maybe you're not able to seat them at that time. And that's sort of par for the course in busy New York City restaurants. So guests can get pretty difficult when they arrive and aren't seated in time. I think it's important to do your preparation when you have a difficult guest. In this instance, for example, that someone arrives for a 7:30 reservation at 7:30 and you're not ready for it. There's a lot of things you can do to show them a good time in the meantime. Show them to the bar, get them a drink if you're running behind, bring some appetizer over, something to extend hospitality, because a lot of people aren't coming out to sit at 7:30. They're coming out to have a good time. So being prepared to take care of people regardless and understand what their expectations are and assess that quickly and respond quickly is important.
So what are some tips that you have when confronting a diner for any of these situations? But we can use the example that I think Sarah brought up, which I've heard to be a pretty common example, which is someone who doesn't want to wear a mask, from the parameters that you've outlined. So while waiting for a table, something like that. What are some tips that you have when it comes to confronting that diner? Let's start with Charles, and then we can go with Amy and Sarah. If you have any additional tips after that, I'd love to hear those as well.
Sure. I think being empathetic to the guest is important. Understanding that you don't know what their experience is, you don't know what their life experience is, but you don't know their experience dealing with COVID or their opinions and their views. So you sort of have to remove all that and understand that what they're telling you, the baseline communication they're giving you, is that they don't want to wear the mask, and their reasons, might not be as important as that simple fact. And your standards are that they have to wear the mask. So letting them know, giving them some becauses, as Sarah had mentioned, the reasons that you are requiring people to wear a mask, and sort of chiming into their empathy there. Maybe it's because of the state laws, or maybe it's because of protecting other diners in the restaurant. Taking the time to be empathetic with them, understanding them, and giving them reasons why the rule is in place is a good place to start.
Amy, what do you think? What are some tips that you have?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Charles that it's very important now more than ever to be empathetic towards your guests, to your staff as well. I think that it's important to remember that, especially in New York City, we are still getting visitors that come from all over the country. And, in certain states, they might have different laws. So when folks go out, they might have different expectations, because there are plenty of other states that, have different regulations at this time. And as Sarah pointed out in her presentation, it's important not to jump to a conclusion, but to really find out, where this guest is coming from. I would say that, this is lucky for us. I would say it's lucky because most of the cases that we've seen so far with guests that are uncooperative with guests are in fact guests that have just simply forgotten through the course of their dining experience. They're having a good time. Maybe they stand up, maybe they forget. One thing that we've done at Cote in particular is we have stationed complimentary masks everywhere. They are at the front host stand. They are in every guest service hutch. They are also behind the bar, because our bar happens to be at one of the hallways leading to the restrooms, where guests most frequently forget to put their masks back on. And, rather than having the staff constantly remind people, when someone starts to get up without a mask, we kindly offer this to them. And it's our way of hospitably offering them almost a service in giving them a free mask. And 9 times out of 10, most guests will say, "Oh, that's right, I've got my own, I don't need that." And then the other 1 out of 10 will just take the mask that we've handed out to them, they'll put it on, and they'll use it in the restaurant.
That's
Sarah.
a great subtle cue to have those masks placed around like that.
Yeah, I think so too. It's a great little nudge. I feel like we can surround it with nudges, kind of as Sarah was talking about, like having that messaging at so many points before they even get to the restaurant. Once they get there, having those masks are a really subtle nudge. Sarah, what are some tips that you might have in confronting a diner?
Well, I completely agree with what Charles and Amy both said. I think what I would offer is what not to say, which I didn't really talk about too much in the training, but I think common fallbacks tend to be blaming someone else. Corporate told us to, or it's not my decision. I think those are ways to upset someone easily, and I would err on the side of giving a really genuine explanation as opposed to giving them a categorical no, but not really explaining why. And I also think, again, just in terms of de-escalating the conflict, just avoiding interrupting, really genuinely listening and asking follow-up questions, keeping your voice low and slow can really also help calm them down if a guest is upset.
Sarah, I have a question for you, and I feel like it kind of goes to what you were just saying about keeping your voice low and slow. I feel like I've heard that flight attendants are trained to like not just speak in a certain way, but also position their bodies in a non-confrontational way, like not crossing your arms. Like, does body language play into it at all?
I think so. I think, not just body language, but also where you situate yourself physically in the restaurant. Like I mentioned, stepping to the side or stepping to a corner that's not easily visible to everyone. That was something I had a lot of success with when I was a manager, because I feel that guests who are upset generally start upset about the thing they're upset about, but then it becomes about being embarrassed or not wanting to be wrong. And so I think if they're to the side or out of the view of the dining room, sometimes that can help. And yeah, I think, using friendly body language and facial expressions versus angry body language. And angry body language would definitely be, crossing your arms. It would be getting up in someone's face. I think any of those, or, pointing your finger at someone. I mean, we've all had guests do that to us, and we know how that puts us into fight or flight mode. So those are the things I would definitely try to avoid.
Thank you. So, Charles, as indoor dining reopens, what are some ways, you've been able to provide hospitality while protecting staff?
At the moment, I am not operating an indoor dining facility, so it's probably a better question for Amy.
All right, let's go to Amy. And then if you have any tips for other ways that you've been able to like support your staff, when dealing with problematic customers or just otherwise providing support to staff, I'd love to hear that as well. But Amy, let's go to you first.
Sure, and Charles, feel free to jump in any point. Well, there's a couple of things that we've kind of looked into here at COAT. I think from a cultural perspective, it's important to have the kind of top-down leadership that that really values management, values the safety and the well-being of your management. That way your management can get on the floor and take care of their employees. And it's kind of like a trickle-down effect. I think that if your management feels well cared for, your team will feel well cared for, and then they'll be able to go out there and take really good care of the guests. So, as far as some facility changes that we've made to the restaurant prior to our reopening, there were a lot of expensive things that we had to consider putting into place, barriers and whatnot. But one thing that we wanted to prioritize was also our back of house facilities and not just the front of house guest facing facilities. So one thing that we did do was we renovated the employee locker room, and we kind of refreshed the lockers, and we installed these UV lights overhead and that provide some sort of sanitation, or at least provide the staff with the peace of mind and knowing that ownership wants to invest in their safety as well. As far as guest-facing hospitality, there are so many things that have just become our new reality that we've had to adapt to. And one way that we've tried to make the masks in particular feel a little bit more natural is that every guest that comes into COAT actually gets a complimentary mask holder. It's something that we had custom made. There's a little stamp on it. It actually says for your mask. So every time you sit down, you get this nice little pouch. You know, and I think most guests are actually pretty delighted by it. And it's funny what a difference just this small piece can make. And telling guests, here's a gift for you. Please take it home. It's yours now. You know, once you get home, do whatever you want with it. And it's a fun little conversation starter as well. We've been telling people that it's a pandemic souvenir, if you will.
Oh, that's great.
I love it. And Charles, what are some ways, you know, but pre-COVID, what are some ways that you found, you know, to help value your staff and make your staff feel valued, you know, at any time, you know, even without a pandemic?
Well, it's a potentially a big answer, but when it comes to operations, I think you need to do the legwork to understand what service you're providing to your guests and at what volume, and what you need in order to get that done. I've, you know, way in my past as a server and a bartender, I've worked for so many places that under-resourced their goals. So, you know, I would find myself working as a waiter 12, 13, 15-hour shifts, and some part of me loved that, you know, like the energy of it, but after a while, it wasn't really a sustainable lifestyle. So understanding what resources you need to achieve your goals and doing that math, sort of planning that out on paper and then seeing does it work and testing it in the real world, I think is key to launching and sustaining any business. When you do that, I think interfacing with your staff, having conversations, understanding what is their experience like at work? Are the shifts too long? Is the physical labor too much? You know, are they feeling intellectually challenged? If you're planning on keeping a staff that you're going to grow with, and you know, this is a part of their career, understanding their needs, and are you providing that for them? And that's a really flexible thing. You need to be really flexible to accomplish that. If you I can't count how many business plans I've put together that I put it on paper and I'm like, this is the plan, it's going to work great, and it doesn't. It changes so much, and part of the plan is to change and adapt with your staff and with your guests, and with, you know, no one could have I don't think anyone could have predicted what was happening in 2020 to the restaurant business. So in order to survive through that and thrive through it and make your staff feel great, you have to be extremely flexible and creative, think on your feet. And a lot of these things Amy is discussing are great. These are brilliant solutions. So yeah, I mean, I think the preparation and planning is key. Conversations with your staff for sure, and understanding what they're trying to get out of the job. A lot of people are here for their career. A lot of people have other careers and they're 3 days a week, waitresses, bartenders, and such, that they still need to be made to feel great about their job in order to provide great service to the guest.
And to stay on the kind of topic of indoor dining for a second, I'd love to hear from each of you things that you either implemented yourself. Amy, you know, you talked about, you know, the UV lights, or you've heard other, you know, folks at other restaurants doing to help prepare for indoor dining, whether that's, I've heard such an array of things from like UV lights to new HVAC systems. What all are you hearing that people are doing to prepare for indoor dining? And to expand on that even slightly more, to prepare for a longer season of outdoor dining, you know, to try to help keep people safe that way, whether it's, you know, outdoor heaters where that's legal, and so on. I'll give this to whoever has thoughts. Amy, you suggested a few items up front, so I'll go back to you.
Yeah, sure. So I mentioned the UV lights. I mentioned some of the mask holders for guests. You know, I think a lot of our planning has been, how can we get creative with the government regulations that are handed to us, right? Because there's a lot that they've told us that we kind of have to do. And then with what we have to do, how do we make it us? Like, how do we make it Cote or our brand or your restaurant, whatever company that you're working with? I know that, you know, the capacity is a really big challenge for a lot of restaurant operators. Obviously, this is a business model that's really built on volume. And right now in New York City with 25%, it's really tough to make sure that you are still solvent with such a low amount of volume. And I can say for Cote in particular, for those that have never been there before, all of our tables are stationary because they're all grill top tables. So to have no flexibility with my floor plan was a little bit interesting. So, you know, we had our our handyman come in and build us these amazing plexiglass barriers that we put, between every table, and understanding that this would probably be something that would be around to stay for at least the next year, or at least semi-long term. We decided to ensure that how they were built was something that was going to fit a little bit more naturally with the restaurant, because I think that throughout this pandemic and having to pivot and adapt so many times, there were some things that we kind of did that were just like fast fixes, excuse me. And then there were other things that we kind of had to look at, built more for the long term. In terms of filtration, I know that there are a lot of restaurant groups out there right now that are investing in getting the correct filters for their HVAC systems. Once again, at Cote, we happen to be very, very lucky that our tabletop grills are actually, each table is ventilated. That's just how they are by design. But outside of that, I've been really impressed with how other groups are also doing this whole temperature checks thing. And here at Cote, how we currently do it is we still use the handheld, and it is kind of uncomfortable because it's not unlike pointing a gun at someone's head, which is not really the first way you want to greet someone walking in through your door. I've seen that some groups have adopted these facial scanners. They kind of look like these little devices that you leave by your front door. That is something we're looking into now as an alternative technology, since we would like to discontinue the practice of using the handheld scanners up to someone's head.
I had toured a hotel in Manhattan that was doing something very cool with the temperature check and the check-in process. And so when you enter the hotel, they have an area that's clearly marked and stylishly so that you stand in, and there's a security person there that checks you in, confirms that you have a reservation, and they have sort of like similar to what Amy's describing, something that takes your temperature from a distance, and you can be standing with your guests and they'll take all of your temperatures. And once you're cleared, you'll head to the front desk where you check in. And when you check in, they give you paperwork that you have to fill out, so you have to share a pen. And I was surprised that they were doing that, but as soon as you're done with that, the front desk agent that's wearing gloves will put it into this sort of, it looks like a toaster oven, but it's a UV machine that apparently cleans everything that's in there. I thought that was really impressive, and this was like really early on in COVID. They reacted very quickly to that. For restaurants, I'm currently down in Nashville, and a lot of restaurants here in Nashville are doing a really nice job. The touchless ordering and paying, I think, adapted very quickly, and some of the POS companies pivoted to that quickly, where there's a QR code on your table and you can scan it, your menu comes up and you can select what you want. The server will come wearing a mask and talk to you about the menus, but you don't really have to interact with them or touch them or share paper, pen, or menus. And when the meal is finished, they'll drop a check, which is itemized with a QR code. You can pay with the QR code, which I thought was great. You don't have to sign anything or have a pen, which was, I think, a really excellent addition that also I feel like it happened pretty quickly for POS companies to pivot that and do the programming. I was very impressed.
I feel like there's so much happening around QR codes. Sorry, go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, well, I was going to speak to it from an HR perspective. There's so much happening in the front of house, but I think behind the scenes, there's also a lot that needs to happen to support the team. So, a couple of things that we are seeing as emerging HR best practices are, definitely increased training for your staff to make sure that they feel totally comfortable with whatever they're going to confront in the workplace. It could be a difficult guest, it could be health screening. I think also having an action plan for what your company does when you have an incident of COVID in the workplace. Unfortunately, it's bound to happen. It's a likely eventuality. So making sure that you have a plan, that there isn't kind of complete chaos that results from that situation is also important. And a couple of other things too, just in terms of employee welfare, a lot of companies are looking to enhance their benefit offerings, definitely making sure that they have, basic health benefits available to their employees, or they're educating their employees about what's available on the exchange, the public marketplace for healthcare. What other public benefits are available? A lot of employers aren't aware that employees can receive partial unemployment benefits if they come back to work and they're working under a certain amount of time, and their earnings are under a certain amount. So I think just, generally being educated about that so you can educate your team. And then also just understanding how the FFCRA leaves, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, work, because employees who suspect that they have COVID, in most circumstances, can receive paid leave, which is a really great thing. It doesn't, the company can be reimbursed through tax credits. And at the end of the day, it helps protect the rest of the team, and it's a very good thing for the employee. So those are kind of the major things that we're seeing from an HR perspective.
Great, thank you. And I see some questions coming in, so I'm going to pose kind of one last question to the group, and then we're going to get to some of those questions that everybody wrote in. So, Sarah, this is something that you talked a little bit about, training staff so that they're prepared to deal with uncooperative diners when that happens. You talked about role-playing exercises. Charles and Amy, are these things that you've done in your restaurants, or how else have you trained your staff to be prepared for dealing with uncooperative diners? Charles, I'll start with you, and then we can hear from Amy.
Sure. One of the most important things is that it is, and I believe this is something Sarah said in her presentation, it's not about winning an argument. It doesn't necessarily matter if you're right, and you shouldn't, the goal for the staff shouldn't be to come away from the confrontation or the conversation feeling like I won that, or I was right and they were wrong. I really tiptoe around the phrase the customer is always right, because there's a lot of examples of where that wouldn't apply. I'm sure we've all had those, but the point is that someone has an issue, the food is undercooked, or the table wait was too long, or the music's too loud. And rewinding back to something I said previously, doing the preparation for this and understanding, like, what if I'm spending time in my restaurant, like what are the things that are going to happen? What does the data say? Do we have a lot of complaints about these things, and how can we proactively have responses, not so much scripted, but trained, that the guest can have to respond to the guest? What things are we actually willing to do? If a guest says the music's too loud, are we actually willing to turn the music down, or are we going to move their table? So this is a pretty detailed, premeditated thing that happens before operations, and then during operations has to be edited and amended frequently with feedback from staff and data from guests. The staff, I think, the appropriate place for this, in my experience, is during pre-shift meetings, and this happens in real time. There's a complaint on Monday, and Tuesday's pre-shift, we review the complaint and the solution. So the management team and ownership needs to respond quickly with a plan if it's a worthwhile problem to address, and get creative and train the staff on how are we going to address this plan. And everyone's complaining about the music. It's 15 complaints a night. The music's probably too loud, and then you need to amend that. So daily meetings with your staff, FaceTime conversations, creative thinking, leadership, and giving them that opportunity, that arsenal of responses and solutions that, that they don't need to say, I understand the music's too loud, let me go talk to my manager and we'll see if this can take 15 minutes to solve your problem. They should really be trained and armed with the response to fix the problem. That's about it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Charles. Pre-shift is an amazing opportunity to review all the different kind of events that can occur over previous shifts. And, Sarah, you mentioned a little bit about, role playing. We do oftentimes bring up, situations that have occurred in recent shifts so that we can share them with the greater team, as well as workshop, the best possible response. The communication aspect is so important, having a culture of communication in your restaurant where your line level employees do feel empowered to bring those sorts of interactions up to their floor managers. And I think, sometimes what tends to happen in some restaurants is that there becomes this culture where, the line level staff feel that they can kind of dump a lot of conflicts on the management team. And I think it's equally important to actually train your management team to empower your team to fix those issues. So for example, if you have a guest who's having a complaint about their steak being overcooked. Of course, having that complaint communicated, but also having that manager coach the employee on how to fix the issue, rather than having to come in every time and kind of be that hero. You can start teaching your employees how to be great at conflict resolution as well.
Yeah, I think even bringing an employee tableside and without making the guest feel uncomfortable, but as a training moment to have an employee side by side, whether it's a junior manager or a server, and overhear the conversation and be part of it. There's a lot of nuance to this that comes with experience and exposure to these situations. So the body language, the tone in which you're speaking, the words you're using, the sort of attitude you bring to it. There's a lot of nuance that comes with that, and there's a lot of idiosyncrasy that people will sort of discover their style and conflict resolution. So I think exposing your staff to that is very important, and they're great training moments. Every problem is an opportunity for a solution, so it's important to be teaching people that.
Excellent. So we're going to go to some questions from all the attendees. We'll get to as many as we can. So Sarah, I think this one's for you, though, tips from Charles and Amy are also welcome. Do you have any tips for managing internal conflicts on the team, so on your staff, both peer-to-peer and issues peers have with management? How do you handle those?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the unspoken truth, we've been talking a lot about guest conflict, but the other result of COVID is that I think interpersonal conflict in general has increased, including amongst our team. So to answer the question, it's highly tailored to each solution, to each situation. So, I think in some cases you can get both people in the room. This would always be my default with a conflict that I don't think is, harassment or discrimination related. Let's get in a room and talk about it and have a mediated conversation where if it gets heated or it's not civil in any way, the mediator can kind of push pause and be that impartial voice. I'm just thinking of a recent example with a client where there are two female kitchen employees, one of whom is very flirtatious with male employees in the kitchen, the other of whom is very principled and feels that that's not the right thing to do, and they are upset with each other, and they basically have said we won't work together. So, I think can we get them in a room to talk about it? Is there a convenient way to potentially separate them? I don't think changing people's schedules is typically practical, but it's definitely an option to consider. And 3, I think also is know where their choice is. You can either get past this or you won't be able to continue working here. And sometimes that's the case. So I think, depending on the severity of the issue, I will say for more severe issues, something that I maybe flag as harassment, discrimination related, someone who uses buzzwords that makes me think that it might go there, I would handle that very differently. I wouldn't get both people in the room. I would investigate by interviewing each person separately, interviewing any witnesses or participants in their relationship. And from there, I would figure out what that solution looks like. And it may not be having them in the same room at all. And a lot of this is based on judgment and experience. Like, I think it goes back to what Charles said about, observing a more experienced manager having these conversations. This might be something that you have to ask your HR professional about. You have to ask your legal counsel about. If your instinct tells you that it's potentially serious, I would always ask a third party to just confirm that you have the right instinct about how to resolve it.
So our next question is, I don't know who should take this one because I don't know if anyone's had experience with this before. What do you suggest as a response, or how do you handle guests that are recording with their phones a situation that has escalated? Charles or Amy, have you experienced this? Sarah, what would your tips be? I'm not sure if anyone has dealt with this before.
I haven't. I mean, no, I haven't had that. I guess that's probably going to be happening more frequently. I mean, I have a pretty strong conviction in the way I handle these things, and I would probably ask someone not to film me. I mean, my privacy is important to me. But if they insisted on filming me, I would probably handle the conversation very similarly. You know, if you're someone that is able to handle you know, there's so many nuances to what is the situation they're filming and so on and so forth. But I would say stick to the plan and handle the situation with integrity and be understanding. And what will happen is they'll catch you on film being great at conflict resolution.
Charles, I think that's a great answer. I have thankfully not encountered this situation yet either, but I have seen it unfold as a witness. And, you know, I guess one observation that I have about this situation is that when the filming comes out, it's typically at a certain level of agitation. Like if for a person to like whip something out and start filming, they're clearly already in a pretty agitated state in most cases. And I think it's what Sarah has said in her presentation, where when people are agitated, you kind of just have to take a deep breath. You have to be calm. And I think that the worst thing that could hopefully happen is, as Charles mentioned, hopefully they just get you on film being super calm and non-confrontational. And, you know, if things start to get out of hand, you know, Sarah mentioned a couple of other tactics that, you know, we've had to use here at COAT from time to time when we have just severely out of line guests. It's just about getting some support in, and hopefully, you know, rare occasions, if you have to call the police, sometimes you just have to call the police.
Yeah, I would also add, I mean, we've experienced this from an employee perspective where there is maybe a disciplinary conversation and the employee pulls out their phone and asks if they can record. So I would just know that you don't have to have a conversation that you're not 100% comfortable with. That might be a situation where you want to postpone the conversation and maybe talk to your company's legal counsel about, you know, what's appropriate and what's not. And I just would say, you know, don't continue a conversation if you feel like your gut is telling you that something is off.
Yeah, I think that's smart.
And so this is going to be our final question because we have 5 minutes until we wrap. So I feel like adequate time to answer this because it's a nice question. So have you experienced guests who are really like going out of their way to be courteous and respectful to other guests and also to staff? So an example that the attendee who asked this question gave is, for example, wearing masks while, or not just sitting at the table, but also making sure they're masks whenever they're speaking to their server, placing an order. You know, are you seeing this often? And is that sort of, you know, kind of being extra or, you know, just humanly courteous and respectful? Are you rewarding that behavior when people are behaving well? Amy, I'll go with you. Do you have any thoughts on that? Are you seeing that?
Yeah, I'm really glad that question got asked, because when you look at like the media reports every day, I feel like the portrayal of the restaurant, I mean, don't get me wrong, it is a dire situation right now. The restaurant industry is not in a good place, but you know, with that said, a lot of the portrayal is still kind of focused on the most sensationalized drama, which is like what problems are guests causing in restaurants. But the truth is, as I kind of started off with today, the guests that were always great are just more great. Like they're more gracious, they're more respectful. You know, people that have always been respectful of restaurant staff are now doing, as you said, Ashley, trying to mask up even after they're seated at the table. Every time a server comes to the table, that does happen. And then, you know, guests that were always challenging are, you know, just a little bit more challenging than they used to be. But, you know, with that said, I don't think that we're necessarily, you know, rewarding these guests for these behaviors, but just like when any great guest comes into the restaurant, we try our best to develop a relationship with them, because those are clearly the guests that we want to come back to the restaurant time and time again, because they're the kind of great guests that contribute to an awesome culture and an awesome environment for our staff, and therefore to the other guests seated around them as well. And there's many ways that you can do that. You know, in a manager's arsenal, they have the ability to give gifts if they want to, but they also have the ability to give time and to give their contact for future reservations. And those are, just a few examples of all the great things that you can do to develop a relationship with any guest, including the ones that are going the extra mile during this pandemic.
Yeah, I think that's a huge note to end on. It's just, if you recognize guests that are great guests that you want to have frequent in your establishment, whether you're giving them a complimentary drink or you're giving them your business card, and you're their direct point of contact for reservations, and I think that's a great thing to do. And you're inviting people that are great guests to dine at your restaurant more, so you're building more of that clientele, which is I'm 100% supportive of that.
Sarah, do you have any thoughts on the topic?
Yeah, well, I was thinking from my perspective as someone who's dining now more often than I'm managing, I think just gratitude. I'm very grateful for the restaurants. I live in Hoboken, New Jersey, and there are several restaurants that are open that are taking COVID precautions really seriously. And I think what I feel as a guest is I feel immense gratitude when people express appreciation to me for being a good guest. So, that can just be simply saying that, we're so glad that you came in. You've been so wonderful and easy to deal with. There are a couple places in town that we really like to go because we experience that kind of gratitude. So that means a lot as a guest.
Thank you. Well, apparently my webcam disappeared. There we go. It came back. But that's okay because we're wrapping up. So thank you again for joining us, Sarah Diehl, Charles Syke, and Amy Zoe. It's been great having you with us. Thank you for joining us as attendees. As I said at the top, a recording of this webinar will be available on our James Beard Foundation website, and also I think openforgood.com. This is our Back to Business series, which is presented by Audi, and the next in our Back to Business series will be next Monday, that is October 19th, and that will focus on mental health. So we hope to see you there, and again, thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much.